The Zion Christian Church has experienced a split that created a grand rift, turning it into two large church bodies. Edward Lekhanyane and Joseph are the figures noted for historically rifting the church into two, that being the star emblemed ZCC and the dove emblemed ZCC. In today's video, we are going to talk about the huge fight for power which left the church splintered. This is the third of the 4-part video series on the ZCC. So, I advise you to go watch the first two videos so that you can have a clearer picture of where we currently are. This is a very dense topic on the Zion Christian Church history, as this church is a very controversial church, deemed by many Christian scholars and spectators as a cult. Now, let's get to it. From 1945, the church founder Engenas' health deteriorated. He thus started to administer his church duties through his counselors, who were his younger brothers, Adolf and Paulus. These were his right-hand men at the time. At around this time, the sickness was very bad, and he could only be persuaded to appear in public during conferences. Amongst his son, Joseph, his fifth son, was his favorite. He used to drive his father to his congregational meetings and was very close in relationship to his father. Looking at the closeness of this relationship, members believed that this was a way that Engenas was sending a message that Joseph was to be their next leader. At around this time, his second-born son, Edward, was away from home because he had differences with his father. And at around this time, Engenas' health was heavily deteriorating, thus prompting the church leadership and the congregation to ask the question of importance: who was going to be their next leader? The ministers and counselors were not clear on this matter. However, the constitution of the church laid down that the conference, which was made up of the ordained ministers and lay preachers, shall then proceed to elect a bishop who shall hold office for life. This then meant that the election of the bishop was the duty of the conference and not of Engenas. The constitution also categorically stated that the bishop was to be appointed for life. The appointment was to take the traditional form, where chiefs were leaders by virtue of their birth, not for merit or general ability. It was only a few people at this time who knew of the constitution, and they did not bother about it really. To the members, the appointment of the successor was Engenas' prerogative. The informant, Mr. Abushiru, said that they believed and had confidence that Engenas knew the direction of his church, and he would not leave them alone, but would provide them with an able leader. His instructions would be implemented without question, because opposition would be viewed as vying for power or leadership. The ZCC being a spiritual church, it was believed by the members that God would reveal to Engenas which of his sons would be a successor. The choice would mean that God, through Engenas, would transfer all leadership powers, including faith healing, to such a nominee. On the part of the church body, any choice would be accepted as long as it was made by Engenas. On this point, one may conclude that whatever reasons were advanced for the appointment of a successor, the main task was to keep the succession as a family affair. Just as in the traditional kingship, Engenas was reported by his followers to have said a number of things concerning the future of his church. These sayings were seen by the followers as prophetic words. For example, Engenas once went to Johannesburg in 1934 and stayed in Alexandra Township. On one Friday, he had an argument with his elders about the future of his church. The argument was prompted by statements from the leaders of the ZAC and ZAFM that Engenas' church would collapse and die. Engenas called on his ministers, Mr. Mabena and Mr. Sinona, look for a prophet from whom they could find out about the future of the church. They immediately suggested Mr. Moses Mamabolo, whom they knew as a powerful prophet in the church. And due to some controversies, Engenas withdrew the statement of calling for the prophet. He then asked them to look for a certain woman by the name Maria Sefutuma, who was notorious for weak moral behavior. She was a domestic servant somewhere in Johannesburg. The following Sunday, she arrived panic-stricken, for she thought Engenas wanted to question her about her behavior. They then knelt down and prayed, and the woman told them that God says that the church will develop and grow. She furthermore said that the church will be joined by all races in Africa. But before long, the church will split into two. She further stated that God told her that the split will be temporary, as the church will someday again be one. The elders who were present at the prophecy were surprised to find that the prophet had told them what Engenas had already told them. The elders who were present when this prophecy was brought forth were worried and wanted to know who exactly will be the cause for this rift. They all took a vow that they would fight to their death if there was any amongst them who would attempt such a move. Mabena and Sinona were delegated to approach Engenas to seek a solution or method which they can use to avoid this happening. They also asked exactly who it was that would cause this split. He did not give them answers, but he just told them that he will ask God to keep them, that they should live and see the day that all these prophecies come to pass. In the meantime, Engenas sent out messengers to tell the congregations about the prophecy. The question then rises, what then was the source and the importance of the above prophecy? Engenas, as an experienced member of his church, was perhaps more aware of the position and the direction of the church more than anyone else. He also had experience of what ministers and powerful prophets could do with the church, as it had happened in the ZAC and the ZAFM, where he himself split away to form his own church organization. Thus, this hints that he might have had a fear of a breakaway by his followers. To the members of the ZCC, Engenas was the first prophet in the church, and what he said was taken as an instruction from God himself. Thus, members even today see prophecy as a God-sent message to alert them as to who Engenas was, which is a hint to the church belief that he was a man of vision. So thus the split was seen as being inevitable, with the hope of reunion one day under some leader. Before this, another event concerning the future of the ZCC had already occurred in 1933. A man by the name Amos Bushiru left Sikorokoro area to join Engenas at Khupa village, where the event was said to have taken place. What happened was this. In that year, Engenas and his two elders, Mr. Amos Morerwa and Mr. Charles Mamabolu, went to Khupa village, which is to the south of Johannesburg. Here they had went to visit Engenas's in-laws. When whilst there, they decided to have a walk. While at an open place near where the family stayed, a wild dove came and sat on Engenas's head. Engenas caught the dove and pulled out two hind feathers. The two feathers he put in the cap, which he used up to his death. He then let the dove go. The dove flew and sat on the roof of the house in which they stayed. Engenas told his men that the two feathers represented the two churches which would emerge from his church after his death. The event was spread all over. It was emphasized by the ministers that Engenas was a man of God whose head the dove had sat. Congregations reacted by starting songs to mark this event. The most popular one of these is a song titled Moria. In Moria, the dove sat on a tree, which has hints and assumptions that this tree was Engenas and that he was something close to the biblical reference of a tree of life. The most conspicuous token of commemoration of this event is the dove badge, which is used by the followers of the St. Engenas Zion Christian Church, which is the name of the church of one of the splintered groups. It would seem that although Engenas seemed to have known with certainty that his church would split, he was indecisive about whom of his sons should be his sole successor. It may be said that Engenas understood the position of his sons and wanted to provide for both, just like the African traditional kingship. The comparison of Engenas' sons with the two Western stars is a well-known event among the followers of the ZCC. What happened was this. Engenas had a habit of staying with the elders of the church, which he termed Banna Bakhoro, men of the council. In one of these meetings in 1941, Engenas called his children, family members, and elders. He showed them two stars in the west. It was a big star and a smaller star. The smaller one was situated above a bigger one. He told his group to watch the stars several nights. To him, the two stars symbolized the two churches which would emerge from his church after his death. The big star symbolized the elder son, while the smaller one symbolized the younger son. The two stars would enter into a combat with each other for the leadership. Engenas went on to explain that in the struggle for power, it would at first seem that the bigger star has swallowed up the smaller star. But ultimately, the smaller one would emerge victorious. The bigger star would fight vehemently to gain the upper hand, but the mission of leadership is however not bestowed upon it. And thus, he explained that this is the reason why the smaller star would win the struggle. It was then reported that the men watched the stars and noticed how the smaller one ultimately got below the bigger one. Engenas' view of the stars was that people should rally around the smaller one, which would be characterized by a small following. He left the people with a question mark with this, and it was only later in 1948 that it became clear that Engenas, referring to the smaller star, was referring to Joseph. At the time of this prophecy, it was not clear who the biggest star was. This was because Barnabas, Edward, and Johannes were Joseph's elder brothers. Engenas had his nominee, whom he knew was going to clash with what the followers thought should be the case, namely the traditional choice of the first son. The dubiousness and lack of clarity in stating who is the successor made it possible for ministers to make up their own choices, while also ripening the ground for suspicion against Paulus Lekganyani's stand on the fifth son. After the split, great emphasis was placed on this prophecy of the stars. To the followers of the ZCC, through these mentioned incidents, Engenas prepared a fertile ground for a split. Taking into account the influence and the command he had, he could have just appointed the successor publicly. It would have been unlikely that he would have encountered any opposition. Or rather, he could have made his succession clear to his sons, just as he did with the sharing of his property and the partition of his farms, McLean Farm and the Wombeck Farm. Through only mentioning the fifth son, he made things way more complicated. There was also later more difficulty which existed in Engenas' family concerning the future of his church. This was caused by the fact that his firstborn son Barnabas died in 1948, shortly after Engenas. Many considered Barnabas a kind-hearted and favorite. He obeyed his father and followed unconditionally, thus making him a more probable candidate. And thus this death only caused more confusion and shock to the people. When Engenas' second son was born in 1926, there were rumors of the smallpox epidemic in Ramamabolo. And because of the fear of this infectious disease, Engenas refused to let people enter his kraal. The refusal included even some of his best friends and members of the Mamabolo chiefs' kraals. The people around Molepo, Mamabolo, and Dikgale interpreted the no thoroughfare instruction to be appointed that an important person had been born, a future leader, that Engenas was given the child more care and protection. This event was used to support Edward's case as a future leader of the church. During the last 3 years prior to the death of Engenas, Edward was not at home in Boyne. This unconfirmed misunderstanding resulted in the latter going to look for work. He was occasionally employed as a driver in Natal. However, everywhere he went, members took him as the future leader, and on the other hand, he was building his friendship with many senior members of the church. This caused tension with Engenas because Engenas' children were not expected to go to work. They were supposed to be members of the brass band and help with the church administration. Back at home, it seemed that Engenas seemed to have favored Joseph, his fifth son, for in any matter of the church, he would demand that Joseph be present. Here it may be argued that Engenas was gradually presenting Joseph to the people and perhaps observing their reactions. It is reported that when Engenas fell seriously ill in 1948, before his death, he summoned his brothers, including Adolf Matiba and Elijah Khadla. When all had arrived, he told them that it was clear that he was soon dying, and thus he had given his brother Paulus Lekganyani the task of presenting his fifth son, Joseph, as the future leader. This, however, cannot be confirmed because there was no formal records of this meeting. In 1948, Engenas died and Paulus Lekganyani, the last brother in the family of Engenas, sent a telegram to Adolf Matiba and Samuel Senomadi, who were in the Rand on a church mission. Paulus reportedly bid them home, and upon their arrival, they found that Engenas was already buried. Paulus then sent them back to visit the congregations and to impart the sad news to them. They comforted the people by telling them that Engenas had not left them alone and that Paulus Lekganyani would show them their leader in due course. However, their appointment was subject to traditional custom. They could not show the new leader before the period of mourning expired. This meant waiting for a year before any appointment could be made. This made the congregants anxious, and thus they thought that Paulus and his group were not sure about the leader and were playing for time to determine the feeling of the people. Johannes Lekanyane, Paulus' son, confirmed that people accused his father of divisive tendencies and discrimination against Engenas' sons. Some felt that he was creating a position for himself in the interim so that he could ultimately usurp the leadership. At home, the people were calm and confident, but the distant congregations grew impatient and demanded an immediate appointment of the leader. This was not without grounds. People felt insecure, especially in a faith-healing church as such. This was a real problem to them. This is because they believed that only the one that was appointed by Engenas would be able to perform the church duties. Members of the church felt that the church lacked guidance and that followers would disobey orders. It may be speculated that had Paulus acceded to the demand for an immediate appointment, then he could have avoided the growing tension on the reef. This tension was a driving force for the appointment of a leader. The position grew worse and the church was drifting into two camps. Those who looked to Edward as their leader, mostly from Johannesburg and Pretoria complex, especially because he used to be a truck driver driving in around these regions and creating friendships and close bonds with these people, and those who put their trust in Paulus to show them their new leader. By the end of 1948, there were two forms of decisions, namely the home and the reef decision. The home group was one which was loyal to Paulus and wanted the period of bereavement to elapse before any appointment could be made. Paulus went on comforting the people. He told them that his brother Engenas, before passing, had given him a horn of oil, which he would use to anoint the next leader. This he would do after the period of mourning. Often when Paulus, preached in church, he would put his hand in his pocket and say, "Kamo, ke swerele nakana la makura, gore ke tloche yo e tlo ba go moetapele," which literally translates, "In this pocket, I have a little horn of oil to anoint the chosen leader." It was this reference to the horn which eventually made the people nickname the followers of Joseph Lekanyane as Bagale Nakana, those of the little horn. Many followers believed that Paulus's decision would be to anoint Edward as the new leader, following the traditional kingship rule that sets the older brother as the one that is set for the chair. This belief was mostly held by the reef group. Moreover, Edward was making appearances amongst them, making him more familiar with the people. Edward, having heard of his father's death, came home to Boyne, where he found that the conditions were not favorable for him. He left again for Johannesburg, where he stayed with Elijah Mamabolo, who was Edward's strongest supporter and the man who appointed Edward as the future leader of the church in Johannesburg. Edward presented himself to the people through Elijah Mamabolo, who acted as a link, cementing his image as a future leader to the people. This later grew to a very grand and memorable event. It was in Alexandra Township, Johannesburg, where people gathered to discuss the presence of Edward amongst themselves. It was here decided to save the future leader by appointing him and taking him to Boyne to take his father's position. The people took a vow to defend the cause and even use violence if needs be. A date was fixed for this purpose, and a fleet of buses were booked to accompany the men that they called Konyana ya Modimo, the Lamb of God. Leading prophets in the church, including Moses Mamabolo, Elijah's younger brother, supported the move. The home front heard the decisions of the Witwatersrand group, but they were unable to act. Paulus kept on emphasizing that the Reef group was trying to appoint their own leader and that he would show them the one appointed by Engenas. On the weekend, the Reef group arrived with Edward amidst great excitement and dances. The home front was surprised to see the fleet of buses entering and leading to the entrance of Engenas' house. People were singing and praising Edward as the future leader of the church, with remarks such as "Edike Morena di Dilonza Tatawe" and "Edike Morena Kasebeli," which literally translate, "Eddie is the ruler of his father's place, and Eddie is the true and only leader." A dancing pattern popularly known as Mukuku was formed as a way to hypothetically and dramatically stamp out any opposition which is why the St. Engenas ZCC doesn't have Mukuku as part of their church dance. It was formed by the star-emblemed ZCC members who followed Edward as a show of power and the symbolic stamping out of opposition when they got to Moria. During their stay, the Mukuku group would dance and visit Paulus's group, where they destroyed some of the shelters and threatened to kill Joseph the fifth son. The church was thus divided into two groups, the Edward group and the Joseph group. Edward had more followers than Joseph. Joseph remained with almost all of the members of the Engenas' family, except for Ruben Lekhanyane, Engenas' brother, who was reported to not having been in good standing with Engenas while he was still alive. Almost all the Reef congregations supported Edward, although there were some who defected from Edward to Joseph. Initially, the two groups prayed together, but this was found difficult as they could not easily determine to whom the members directed their loyalty. A system was devised to ascertain the followers of the two leaders. The Edward group used force to let the people confess whether they belonged to Edward or Joseph. This was done in public, and people were intimidated in the process. This process was accompanied by violence, and skirmishes were reported to the police in the process. The Edward group confiscated the instruments of the brass band and Engenas' pocket car. These were later retrieved with the help of the police and lawyers. Paulus, who was speaking on Joseph's behalf, asked some of Joseph's followers to leave Moria till such time that the tension was over. A day was fixed to install Joseph officially as the leader of the ZCC. On the appointed day, there were very few people at the ceremony, which was a show that the congregation had seemingly chosen Edward as their leader. It is reported that in his first speech, Joseph announced that those who doubted his leadership should question his dead father, who was responsible for his appointment. He asked those who were not satisfied to decide if they wanted to join his brother Edward. He told them that as proof that his father had appointed him, he would build up his church by converting new people to the church even if they did not accept him as their leader. And as part of proving his claim, he showed the people Engenas' cane walking stick, and some of those that attended this meeting believed that this walking stick was proof of the legitimacy of his claims. Seeing that Edward had the larger following, Joseph submitted to the pressing conditions which required him to move and set base camp away from the main branch. Well, in current day, there is little to no hostility between these two churches. However, there was a rift that was created by this clash, which has lasted to the second generation, where we see the sons of each of these leaders leading their churches separately. But breakaways are not a pattern that seems to end just like that. In each generation, there's always room for more breaking away in whatever sect you are in, especially if the church in question is a faith-healing movement. And an example of this is that we are witnessing a new form of faction of the Zion Creationist Church, which is led by a man named Michael Khotso Serepo, also known amongst his followers as Maritobani Barnabas Lekhanyane, who is claiming to be the son of the current-day ZCC Bishop Edward Barnabas Lekhanyane, conceived out of wedlock, with claims of having interest in mending second-generation disputes of the church under his newly formed movement of the Zion Creationist Church.
Because of bona ge ba rapela ba re modimo wa thabasio, rena re re modimo wa thabasio, re re mmupi wa magodimo le mafase, modimo wa bokoko wa rena ka moka re le mo, a re re modimo wa an individual. Because of gore modimo wa an individual, wena o shala kae? O shala kae go rote thagela ka ntle go ra re modimo ga se wa gago, modimo kwa mokete fela e kgonagala.
In the next video, we are going to be looking at this in more depth, looking into Michael's claims and thoroughly investigating the church's prerogative in the current day. Do make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to stay tuned in and to get notified when we drop new content.